Coming up tonight, the three sisters finally meet. The Harmony makes it to the US, and we take a look back at everything that went on during this sailing. It's all coming up, so let's set sail. Welcome to day number 13 of the cruise view from on board the Harmony of the Seas. And today was Friday, November 4th, and as you can see from behind me, we finally made it. It is about 4:30 a.m. on November 5th, and the Harmony of the Seas is officially docked in Fort Lauderdale now. So she's finally made it home to her official home port for the foreseeable future, right here in Port Everglades. And today, obviously, the top story is that this is the end, and today was the big meeting of the three sisters right off the coast of Fort Lauderdale, right here. Oasis, Allure, and Harmony of the Seas, the three largest ships in the world, coming together for the first time, an event that has never really happened in history before, where the three largest ships sailed together in unison, and certainly an incredible one to see and be a part of. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. So moving on to our location today, before we were docked in Fort Lauderdale, we were obviously out at sea, and this morning at, noon, our location was 26 degrees and 10 minutes north by 79 degrees and 36 minutes west. At that point, it was roughly 4,074 miles since Malaga, with just 25 miles left until Fort Lauderdale. Weather forecast for today, we had a sunrise at 7:22 a.m. this morning. And a sunset at 6:28 p.m. tonight. The sunset, of course, happened just after the three ships met, and as everyone was kind of going off on their own way, you just had that beautiful sunset pop up right over on the horizon. And for the temperature today, we had a high of 80 degrees, and it was, of course, very hot. In the morning, it was rather cloudy out, but as the day moved on, we got some really beautiful blue skies and perfect conditions for those three sisters to meet up. So for our compass, obviously we know what the big event was, but there were several other items that took place throughout the day leading up to then. Starting at 9:30 this morning in the Royal Theatre, they had the premiere of a 3D movie from DreamWorks, Trolls, which premiered on land today as well, and they had a simultaneous premiere on board the ship. And of course that was in 3D, as the Royal Theatre is fully 3D compatible. And we were on the Quantum when another movie premiered. They did not premiere it on board the ship at the same time. They premiered it about a week later on the next sailing. So it was kind of interesting that now on Harmony, after 9 days at sea, they were able to actually premiere the movie the day that it was officially released and kind of do that big simultaneous premiere party. And then at noon today, they repeated the Let's Celebrate Entertainment Parade in the Royal Promenade. Of course, they did that several days ago. I think it was an evening parade, like 7:45 or something like that. So today it was at noon, and it was exact same parade as the previous time, just repeated again, and a lot less crowded since most people that wanted to see it saw it the first time. But it was, once again, one of those things that you can see as many times as you want, and many people did choose to see it a second time, so I don't think many people actually missed it the first time, so it was a very packed event that day. And at 2 o'clock, we had out on the pool deck the crew versus guest pool volleyball. Usually this is a pretty entertaining event. This time didn't get too much participation. Like the belly flop competition, where I believe it was only 4 people that competed, they only had enough people for a maximum of 1 team of guests to compete with. So it really wasn't that big of an event compared to what it normally is and has been on several other cruises in the past. But those are all pretty much just filler to take up some time throughout the day. They also, of course, had that technical preview of the fine line that they were talking about yesterday. That occurred in the Aqua Theater about 2 o'clock as well. And all that just led up to the meeting of the three sisters. And that event started about 3 o'clock, 3:30 in that time frame. That is when you could start to see some ships on the horizon. According to everything they've said, the Oasis was supposed to be waiting out there for us. We'd be the second one to arrive because we were coming across the ocean and, of course, had a lot of flexibility in her schedule, and the Oasis was completely empty, so she had nothing to do but sit there and wait. While the Allure had to divert her itinerary in order to get to Fort Lauderdale to make this meeting because she had a port of call previously and is on her way to Nassau right now and will not be back to Fort Lauderdale until Sunday. So she kind of had a detour and was expected to be the third. But as we pulled up, the Allure of the Seas was the one that was sitting there waiting for us, all ready to go. And then shortly after we arrived, the Oasis finally left port and we got to watch her leave Port Everglades and come out and join the party. And that was a huge event. It lasted until about 6 o'clock, so it was a good 2 hours of the ships just maneuvering themselves around one another, different forms of lining up, and of course there were a lot of horn blowing as well. And we also had the fireboats running on the opposite side of us. So we had the Oasis and Allure on one side of the ship while the fireboats were on the other side of the ship. Helicopter flying all around us. And of course, Royal Caribbean trying to use this as a marketing moment and get those shots for all their future ads and commercials, made sure the ship looked like a presentable ship and had crew out on the flow riders doing some runs and giving something for the cameras to see. The Aqua Theater was running. They really tried to make the ship feel a little more alive and active to get those really pretty shots out of it, which also gave us some nice shots to use as well. So as I said, that lasted about 2 hours from about 4 to 6 o'clock. And as part of the festivities, they actually gave everybody on board the Harmony of the Seas free Voom internet from 5 o'clock until 6 o'clock today. So everyone got an hour that they could post pictures and share everything that was going on board. And as part of that promotion, within that 1 hour, they ran a contest where anyone that used the hashtag Harmony of the Seas and hashtag contest entry was entered into a contest where the winning picture that showcased the three sisters meeting would get a prize of a 5-night cruise to the Caribbean. So it was a nice little contest and really only available to those on board the Harmony of the Seas. And of course, free internet was the only thing that really made it possible for everybody to participate rather than just those willing to pay to have the internet. So that was a really nice thing of them to do. And as you walked around the ship, that was all anyone was really talking about. You had the three sisters going on, but everybody was more concerned about getting that perfect picture of the three sisters than the three sisters themselves. So it really did get a lot of energy into the ship and get everybody excited about this event. And of course, it was an incredible event to see with those three just massive ships coming together and pretty much just moving around the water as if it was nothing, just feet away from each other, it seemed like at times. But I'm sure it was much larger gaps than that, as they always have to maintain that safe distance, even when doing maneuvers like this. And of course, in addition to these clips, I've got a full video of the Three Sisters meeting that you can check out to see the entire event from start to finish. And then, pretty much immediately following the Three Sisters meeting was about 6 o'clock. It was almost like they planned it, which they've been planning this thing for a year, they've said. So I'm sure they did intentionally plan this, but all three ships kind of went their own way right at 6 o'clock. Perfect timing for everybody to go off to their dinner for the night. And tonight, of course, was the 13th night of these menus, and it was a casual night, obviously, with everybody out on the deck for the Three Sisters meeting and having to get their luggage packed for departure this morning. So it was, of course, casual night, and for this menu, at least for me, what I got was the hot harira soup, the Mojo marinated grilled pork chop, which is an item they've had on many menus before. It's one that's been around for a long time, and it was pretty much the same exact item that I believe I've had several times before. And then for dessert, I had the warm apple rhubarb crumble. And then following dinner, there really wasn't too much on the ship. They had some music and bands and, of course, the usual stuff going on in the different clubs and lounges. But the only true event that went on was at 10 o'clock, a second showing of the Trolls movie for those that didn't want to get up too early this morning. So that is the end of this sailing. We've obviously been sailing for 13 nights now. We've had a lot of time on the Harmony of the Seas. She's usually doing 7-night sailings. Right now I believe she's going to go off on either a 3 or 4-night sailing that just goes to Nassau before returning for her big christening event. Well, the winds picked up a little bit too much for my liking, so I've had to move from the sports deck over to the pool deck right at the beach pool. All great locations outside with beautiful views out over Fort Lauderdale. So this is the last night, 13-night cruise. Harmony of the Seas finally made it to the US, so that means it's time to take a look at just how well she did in this cruise. So the Harmony herself, she was of course the star of this cruise, being the world's largest and newest cruise ship, and of course also our home for 13 nights, with 9 of those nights stuck with nothing but her and ocean around us. So Harmony itself did incredibly well. It had a little bit less than double capacity, so it's hard to say for sure on crowdedness, but for the most part, the sailing never once felt crowded. Occasionally, some venues like the Windjammer were a little bit busy, a little bit difficult to find a table, but not ever too bad. They definitely made some improvements to the Windjammer compared to the Oasis and the Allure. They added some elements from the Quantum class's Windjammer, and they just expanded it a bit more and really helped open that up, and it seemed to work well. The traffic flow through it seemed to be a bit better. The separate exits and entries really seemed to help with the flow. So they did a great job of rethinking that, and it really seemed to help, because that was one of those venues that on my last sailing I didn't even really go into. I went once for breakfast, once for lunch, because there's so many other things around, and that just was such a crowded mess, and that really wasn't the case this sailing. It, for the most part, was busy, but never overly busy. And of course, those are the kinds of changes we've seen throughout the ship, where they've looked at Oasis and Allure, and they've seen what has some bottlenecks, what has some issues, and they've really kind of rethought it, redesigned it, made it work better. And as far as I can tell, those changes seem to be working. I really didn't notice anywhere that the ship kind of bottlenecked. The only area might be entertainment place when shows let out, but there's not much you can do about that. The Royal Theatre is huge and holds a lot of people, and if they all want to leave at the same time, they've got to go somewhere and then spread out, and you really can't stop them from all going through the same passageway. So beyond that, though, the Harmony just seems very well thought out. The improvements all seem to be working. The solarium seems nice. Of course, a lot of people complaining about the lack of pool, but they, of course, made a quick change on that and turned one of the outside pools into an adult-only pool. So they really seem to be on top of finding out what is and is not working and just correcting it, something that we saw in the Jewel of the Seas, where if anything wasn't right, they immediately took care of it, didn't wait around and see what happens. They just immediately looked, see how they can correct it, and did it at that moment. And that's kind of what they seem to be doing with the Harmony of the Seas, just to try and make sure that she is operating the best that she can be. In terms of the different areas of her, of course, one of the biggest areas that we always talk about is the food. When I sailed on the Oasis, that was by far the worst food I've ever had on a ship, not even close to any other cruise ship. It was cold, it was slow, the menu was just really low quality options, and many of the items weren't even really that edible. You'd order it and just let it sit and leave because it really wasn't even worth eating. So that was the absolute worst food I've ever had, and for the most part everybody blamed it on the ship. The Oasis was brand new. She was about 40% larger than any other cruise ship in the world. How could she ever serve that many people and expect it to be good quality food? And that's what everyone just kind of went with when it turned out to be terrible food. Well, the Harmony of the Seas is the exact same size. Same number of people, same size ship. They have 13 menus on the sailing. She's only supposed to do 7 because she's designed for a 7-night cruise. So that was additional menus that the chefs had never done before and had to serve on this sailing. And to help ensure all that went successfully, the executive chefs from Miami were on board to review everything, make sure all the dishes look right, and approve it all before sending it out, which we know from the Grandeur sailing slows things down when they're on board. But the main dining room service was fast all week. Maybe it was a little bit slow some days, but you really didn't notice it. It wasn't extremely slow or noticeably slow. And the food was incredible all week. Even the menus they had never done before turned out incredible. So I don't know why Oasis was so bad, but they've certainly managed to overcome any issues they may have with trying to serve so many people on board the Harmony, and that was the case throughout all the venues. Didn't matter where you go, the food just seemed to be warm, which is often not true on any ship, that the food is still warm when you go out to some of these venues like the Park Cafe. And they seem to have just good quality food. The only issue I found with the food on this ship is that there really wasn't much variety. For the most part, it was the same food every single day in the same venue at the same time. A couple items may change here or there, but for the most part it was the same stuff. And that may be okay when you're on a ship for 7 days and in port half of those days. You get a chance to go to each venue, go to the one you liked a second time, but on 13-night voyages with 9 nights at sea in a row, you really need a little more variety to the food. So that would be the only thing food-wise they have to change. The only thing that I could think of with food that didn't make sense was mini bites. So of course, mini bites is the new replacement for the Wipeout Cafe. Wipeout Cafe, of course, being on Oasis and Allure, same spot. Mini bites is a little more open to the ocean, where the Wipeout Cafe was very closed in. But it's not just a new name and a slightly different appearance. They were designed to be 2 completely different concepts. Wipeout Cafe, quick, easy, picnic-style food, hamburgers, hot dogs, chilies, fries, and ice cream. While Mini Bites is designed to be sort of grab-and-go samplers with things like mini grilled cheese sandwiches, sliders, mini egg rolls, mini quiches, and we of course saw pictures from the preview cruises in Europe back in May that had that. On the Royal IQ app, they advertise it with those explicit items listed and those items pictured. But when you go to Mini Bites, all sailing long, all they served was the exact same food that was in the Wipeout Cafe on the previous ships. So I don't know if they've abandoned the concept for some reason, and it's kind of a shame if they did because it sounded like a neat concept. But for this sailing, we did not see Mini Bites ever show up, and maybe that's a Europe versus North America thing, who knows. Hopefully it'll come back in the future. And then, of course, following food usually comes your evening show. And the entertainment on board the Harmony of the Seas is absolutely incredible. So many different kinds of shows, from 1887 in the Studio B venue to Fine Line in the Aqua Theater, Greece in the Royal Theater. They all were simply incredible and very distinct styles. They each really had their own style, and they all seemed to push the limits of technology as well as artistry and athleticism. That was the one thing that you really saw across all the shows, that they really pushed the athletics and the abilities of the cast members as well as the technology, rather than letting one kind of take over for the other. And then oftentimes when ships have a show, they have that secondary show, and it's really just a cheap thrown together filler kind of show for special circumstances where they need to do something. But on here, those secondary shows really weren't filler shows. They were full-fledged shows that if made the primary show on another ship, nobody would really think otherwise about them because they were full-fledged shows. They just may need an extra 5 or 10 minutes to be a primary show. But they were fully polished off and ready to go shows this time. Hideaway Heist, of course, we had those delays with, but it still turned out to be an incredible show once they pulled it on. And of course, Ice Skate, just like 1887, those figure skaters and ice dancers were absolutely incredible each time they performed. And then, of course, on a transatlantic, you're always concerned about the weather. You never know what you're going to get when you go out into the ocean. For the most part, we got a very good crossing. We, of course, had nice weather at the beginning, some stormy days in the middle, nothing too bad, and then, of course, more of the nice, warm blue skies at the end here. And even the seas seemed to cooperate. We had a little bit of rocky seas in the middle, but smooth seas at the beginning and the end. And for the most part, while there were a little bit of sea movement and rocking to the ship, none of it was too extreme, nothing major that you wouldn't possibly see in the Caribbean, and nothing compared to the last transatlantic that I did where the waves were absolutely massive. So it really was nice weather for a crossing like this the entire way across, and we of course took that southern route to help ensure that weather was nice. The one area of the ship that really kind of missed the mark is the area that missed the mark on pretty much every time Royal Caribbean releases a new ship lately, and that is the technology. Their IT department has had 2 years since the Quantum of the Seas set sail. They still haven't gotten their act together, it seems like. The WOW bands seems like a very simple concept. It's done all over the place. It's pretty much a band that's identical in behavior to your card, and yet it still took them 3 days to get it to work, and throughout the sailing I've had to reset it at guest services 2 more times. So in the end, you paid $5 for it. You may save 30 seconds looking for your card to get into your room. You're going to spend a couple hours at guest services trying to get it to work. You're never going to make your time up that you waste by using your card. It's certainly not a time saver, and it's not really working everywhere. When you use it to get into a show, it takes them probably 10 times as long as if you just handed them a card. So it is not a time saver, and it really is still a very buggy product that is not identical to your card on board the ship at all, it seems like. So I'm not really sure why they're having so many issues with the WOW bands, and it seems to be something with their systems, their computers, their databases, something with the way they're operating things, because yesterday we even had an issue where all of a sudden we had 3 people in our cabin, 3 SeaPass cards, 2 WOW bands. That's 5 different things that can open a cabin door. And all of a sudden last night, all 5 items no longer worked. How that happens, I'm not sure, but we had to go to guest services, and it took about 3 trips to try and get everything working, because they do something, some items work, they do another, and now those items work, but the previous ones didn't, and it was just a big mess to try to get everything coordinated and actually be able to get into our cabin again, because something went wrong with their system and things just stopped working. And it's okay if you lose access to information or you can't make a reservation, but when you lose access to your cabin because they can't get their system to work right, that's a little bit of a bigger issue, and something that happened the entire sailing repeatedly. So clearly they've still got some issues going on with the WOW bands, and it seems like door access in general, because the SeaPass cards had issues as well as the WOW bands. And then of course the other big feature of technology is the Royal IQ app. It launched with Quantum of the Seas, and with the Quantum it was really kind of buggy, had some issues, but the biggest thing is that it lacked features. There was not a whole lot of information in it, not anything to do with the compass, and for the most part they've corrected those items. You now have a lot of extra details, information on dining, on venues, a lot of good stuff in there, but the compass is in there, and you can look into the future, you can see a lot of things, but it is very quickly thrown together and poorly done. It seems like the compass is not properly designed or working. One of the big features on the Quantum was that you would see your reservations on your calendar and you could add custom events to your calendar. They've removed the ability to add those custom events. So if you want to schedule something like lunch at the Windjammer for your family and have it on everyone's calendar, there's no way to do that. Even if you're in traditional dining, it does not show up on your calendar. It's 6 o'clock every single day, but it will not be on your calendar, whereas a specialty restaurant or a My Time dining reservation will show on your calendar of events for a day. So that's obviously a bit of an annoyance with it, but the bigger thing was that the way that they have the data set up in there is just, seems like they designed their database completely wrong, because it stores your individual items on your profile rather than linking to the event, which means when you go through the compass and you see an event that you want, you can click and add it to your calendar. If they change the time in that event, it remains on your calendar at the wrong time. If you go and look through the compass again because they add events and remove events and you see it and add it to your calendar again, it will be on your calendar twice. If somebody else wants to join it with you, they have to add it to their calendar. Now you've got it listed twice and you have to go and add it to everybody's calendar at once and then cancel the previous one that was just you. So it's just very buggy, a big hassle, and of course if you add it to your calendar and they change the time, you will never know because your calendar will continue to list the old time while the compass has the new one. And then if they change items in the compass, they change the time on something, or they add a new item, you have no way to know, so you're just kind of looking through the compass every day and adding everything to your calendar that looks interesting, and then going to your calendar and deleting everything that's a duplicate, and then going back again later to see if anything new showed up, and it's just a hassle to deal with that compass in general on board the Rural IQ app. It's really just almost not even worth it to deal with. You're still better off with the paper where you at least know it's pretty accurate, and almost all the time when I'd question a time on something, people would say not to use the Rural IQ. It seemed like that was a pretty standard thing with the entertainment department, not to use the Rural IQ or trust the times listed in the Rural IQ because the papers were more accurate than the IQ app. And when you've got things like a reservation you make online at home that has one time, you look in the Rural IQ app and in the compass it lists to show us another time, while your calendar lists the time that your reservation at home listed, and then the paper copy lists the third time. You have no idea what time your show is unless you go ask a person. So they really got to try and get things a little more unified and straightened out before people can truly rely on going to the Rural IQ app. And they got to make it far more user-friendly, because it is not user-friendly at all when you've got to constantly be adding and canceling events in order to try and get things to sync up and work right. It really seems like thought about the wrong way. Like you're adding the event to your calendar rather than adding that instance of the event to your calendar. So it's one of those things they're probably going to have to think through back at the foundational level, because it's really not even close to how it should be working, it seemed like, this sailing. And for the most part, I think a lot of people were using it at the beginning of the sailing, but as the sailing went on, you saw fewer and fewer people looking at their phone to see what was going on. I think a lot of people just kind of got tired of it and didn't use it anymore, which is a shame because there is a lot of potential there. And unfortunately, when technology doesn't work, people only give it so much time before they just won't bother with it anymore, and that definitely happened on this sailing. But while Rural IQ did not work, they of course did have a couple technologies that did work. They had the nice screens throughout the ship, which worked perfectly, including the addition of menus, so you can go and look at the menu for any of the restaurants, and you could see, I believe, 8 days out at a time. So each day we'd lose the previous day and gain the 8th day into the future. So that was nice to be able to see out. And of course in the Rural IQ they also have those menus, so you can go in and look at those menus in there as well for the entire sailing, all 13 days. It was, I believe, day 3 they finally loaded in there. At the beginning they were not available in Rural IQ, but on day 3 they did get loaded in all the way to the end of the sailing. So they did make it much easier to kind of see menus than it has traditionally been. And of course they also use technology for all the show reservations to check people in, and that was one of those areas that really broke down on Quantum of the Seas. We saw a couple device issues. For the most part they just restarted the device and they worked, and while one device didn't work, other ones still did work. So for the most part those seemed to stay up and be functional the whole time. Beyond just individual devices, that was working, and it seemed to be fairly efficient. They could quickly put the card up and pass you through. If it was the WOW band, it was unfortunately a much slower and more cumbersome process, but with the cards it at least was very efficient. So Harmony of the Seas is a great ship. Oasis plus new technology. Fortune technology is still not there. Hopefully they'll get that act together a little bit. It's been 2 years though, and they took about 1 step forward, 2 steps back, so We'll have to see how they do in the future, if they do make any drastic rewrites, but at this point it looks like that's what they really need to kind of do, is rethink some of these areas rather than trying to fix them, because they are very far from fixable. And one of the areas you really don't think about much, but we talked about a lot on the Quantum of the Seas, was the corporate side of things. Quantum of the Seas was supposed to be special sailings, brand new ship, a lot of festivities and excitement going along, and none of that happened. A lot of rejection and denial and excuses from corporate. We've pretty much seen the exact opposite on everything when it comes to the Harmony of the Seas. Even things you can't quite understand how they pull it off, they've managed to. For instance, Quantum of the Seas, when we sailed on her, she was already in the US for 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the point of the voyage. And when you went to the photo shop and bought the portfolio, which includes a picture of the ship, there was no picture of the ship. They claimed they never got a helicopter in the air to take photos of her, and then that meant they couldn't print them. Yet we were there, of course, we saw them taking those photos, and we know those were lies. Yet today, Harmony, Oasis, and Allure all met up for the very first time. Helicopter was up taking photos of all 3 ships. And that event ended at 6 o'clock. At 9 o'clock tonight, in the photo shop, portfolios that included a nice little itinerary from the voyage and a picture of all 3 ships taken just today was available and ready for immediate pickup. So it seemed like they really kind of flip-flopped on everything that they did wrong on Quantum. They really tried to do right on this Harmony of the Seas voyage. Right from the beginning, they were calling it special. They were pointing out that it was a huge event. They really hyped up the Three Sisters meetings and just how historic and lucky we were to be a part of this big event. They have done everything they possibly could to ensure that people felt special, that we knew this was a big event, that people cared about it, and to promote the event. So all the things that they really did wrong on Quantum from the corporate side, they seem to have done the exact opposite and really did the right thing, did it all perfectly, and walking around the ship, everybody seemed happy. We really did not see that on Quantum. So obviously they are doing things right now, and we saw that on Jules. They were making that standard sailing very special sailing, and they certainly did it with this truly special sailing. So I'm sure we're going to continue to see this in the future, and that is a good sign, because that's what you want. You want people to be happy, you want people to feel special. You don't want to feel like the corporation just kind of hates you, which unfortunately was how we left Quantum. And that is certainly not the case on Harmony of the Seas, as they have gone well above and beyond to ensure everybody knows that they care and they know about us out here. So that was the Harmony of the Seas and our sailing across the ocean. We of course had the Three Sisters meeting today, and now this morning we were in port. We were scheduled to arrive at 5 a.m. Obviously, we were off the coast about 12 hours early. And after the Three Sisters met, we just hung around off the coast, did some loops around, and had the helicopter come back and take some night photos of us. And then this morning, we had at 2:51, the pilot boarded our ship, so much earlier than our 5 a.m. arrival. And by 3:15, we're already entering the channel. Of course, going past the Point of Americas, and you know, those historic photos we always see of the Oasis arriving, except in the dark. And it was, of course, pitch black, so you really couldn't see much, but there were a couple boats that showed up to see us, and along the shore on both sides, there were a couple people. You could see the flashlights, and not a lot, but a couple camera flashes go off, so a few people did come out to watch. And of course, in the Point of the Americas, there were several apartments that had their lights on, so clearly those people were likely up to watch us as well. And while we got into the channel at 3:15, it was about a half hour later at 3:45 that we're finally pulled alongside the dock and officially docked in the US for the very first time. And now today she'll be leaving later to go on that short cruise to nowhere, But first, she'll be joined in port by the Freedom of the Seas as well, so she'll meet another one of her Royal Caribbean siblings. So in just these last 2 weeks, she's managed to meet the Rhapsody of the Seas, the Oasis of the Seas, the Allure of the Seas, and the Freedom of the Seas. So 4 of her siblings in just a 2-week period. So she's obviously been busy meeting everybody in the family, and I'm sure that's going to continue. I know on the 16th she'll be meeting, I believe it's the Allure of the Seas again. So she'll continue to meet all the different ships in the fleet for the next several months, I'm sure, in the Caribbean, where almost all the Royal Caribbean ships are based and are often in port together. So that is it for this sailing. Of course, the 13-night inaugural transatlantic from Barcelona, Spain on October 23rd, stopping in Palma de Mallorca on the 24th, at sea on the 25th, Malaga on the 26th, at sea on the 27th, all the way through to the 4th when we met up with the 3 sisters, and arriving in Fort Lauderdale early on the 5th. So nearly 2 weeks, but she has made it across the ocean for the very first time to her new home in Florida. And of course, along the way, we've had many exciting departures, a lot more than typically see. Of course, Europe has many small, tight ports, which often leads to these more exciting departures and arrivals. And of course, when you're not in a port, you're at sea, and we've had plenty of those as well. A lot of different things to see out there. Unfortunately, not too many sunrises or sunsets on this voyage, but plenty of ocean, a lot of calm seas, and a lot of rough seas as well. So real variety there. And that, of course, is one of the big features of a transatlantic, all those sea days. But it's not just about what happens outside of the ship, it's also what happens inside. So we've had many parties and parades, different festivities throughout this sailing. Some of them part of the normal Harmony package, and others special for this sailing. And then, in a rather odd twist of things, of course, Captain Gus has been prominent throughout this voyage, doing lectures, holding events, really all over the place. I think he probably hosted about 5 or 6 different things during this voyage, which is a bit unusual for a captain who typically is only out there maybe once or twice during a voyage. And in addition to all the official parts of the cruise, on the theCruiseView we've also had several different interviews with members of the entertainment staff as well as the officers on board the ship, see how things were going this whole voyage, as well as taken tours of pretty much every venue on board and looked at all the food as well. But this is not the end of my vacation. As I mentioned before, it was not the start either, as I started in London and then Disneyland Paris, some time in Barcelona, the cruise, and now I've got 2 more days in Fort Lauderdale, where I'll see, I'm sure, many other ships, as Fort Lauderdale is one of the busiest ports in the Caribbean, especially in the winter months, as all the ships from Europe come back right around now and start their Caribbean seasons from ports like Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and Port Canaveral. So, as we wrap up another voyage of the theCruiseView, we of course want to take a look ahead. The next sailing will be back on the Quantum class. 2 years ago was the Quantum of the Seas. This time we'll be on the Anthem of the Seas. She'll be roughly 2 years old at that time, 6 months older than the Quantum of the Seas. And we will be doing another 12-night Southern Caribbean sailing. Pretty much the exact same itinerary as the second Quantum sailing from last time, except for 1 additional port being added. So we'll have, of course, all the different aspects of the Quantum class that have improved or changed, because that was a very new and different product at the time, and they have made a lot of changes to it, including changes to dynamic dining, and unfortunately now the removal of dynamic dining once it seemed like it was pretty close to perfection. So that'll be on April 17th, and be sure to come back and check that one out. So that does it for this sailing of the theCruiseView on board Harmony of the Seas. Once again, the largest and newest ship in the world, now in the USA. So thanks for joining me for the past 13 nights and coming along for this voyage. Once again, I'm Picone, and stay tuned for the links, as there were a whole lot of different festivities going on today.